A creeping shadow threatens to consume all of Middle-earth. One young elf, Elara, is willing to risk everything to stop it. Defying her clan's elders, she abandons the safety of her home to venture into the forbidden foothills of Mordor. She is driven by a terrifying vision, a glimpse of a darkness so profound it could extinguish all light. Her quest is one of desperate hope against overwhelming dread. She seeks the source of this shadow, a truth so dangerous that others refuse to even acknowledge it. To find it, she risks not only exile from her people, but the very essence of her soul. By the end of this story, you will understand how a single act of defiance can forge a legend and give birth to an unseen order of guardians. What secrets lie buried in the ash-choked valleys that even Sauron fears to remember? And what price would you pay to uncover a truth that could save the world or destroy you? I am always curious to know where a story finds you. If you feel comfortable, please share where you are listening from and the local time there. The air itself felt thin and hostile, each breath tasting of cinders and decay. Elara moved like a wisp of smoke, her steps silent on the shifting scree, her every sense tuned to the guttural shouts of orc patrols that echoed through the jagged canyons. More unsettling than their crude noise were the whispers, formless strands of thought that coiled at the edges of her mind, urging her to turn back, to surrender to the growing dread. She pressed on, her knowledge of the land her only shield, until she found it, tucked away in a fold of the mountain, a place that should not exist. It was an elven outpost, so ancient its elegant stonework was nearly one with the cliff face. But its hidden door was shattered, the interior scarred by deep, frantic gouges. Someone or something had been here before her, searching with a violent purpose. The discovery was a cold weight in her stomach, a confirmation that her quest was not just forbidden, but already in motion. A sharp crack of shifting stone broke her thoughts. A rock slide, triggered by her own passage, tumbled down the slope in a roaring cascade of dust and rock, narrowly missing her but filling the air with its thunder. From the valley below, answering shouts rose immediately, the harsh cries of an orc scouting party, now alerted to her presence. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She could flee back into the open foothills, a desperate race with no guarantee of escape, or she could gamble on the ruins. The decision was made in a single, terrified breath. She slipped through the broken doorway into the shadowed silence of the outpost, committing herself fully to its secrets. The orcs were swift, their heavy footfalls and grating voices soon filling the outer chamber. They began a methodical search, overturning broken furniture and scraping at the walls. With her path of retreat cut off, Elara had no choice but to retreat deeper, descending a narrow stairwell into the profound darkness below. The air grew cold and thick, heavy with a malice so old it felt like a physical pressure. As the guttural calls of the hunters drew nearer, a faint, ethereal light pulsed from a narrow crack in the far wall, a silent, impossible beacon in the oppressive dark. The narrow crack in the stone scraped against her shoulders as she forced her way through, emerging into a space that time had forgotten. The air was still and carried the faint scent of dried herbs and old dust. Faded murals adorned the circular walls, their colors muted but their stories starkly clear. They depicted elven figures, not in glorious battle, but wrapped in cloaks of shifting light and shadow, their forms blending into rock and tree, hiding from the piercing gaze of a single, terrible eye. This was not a fortress. It was a refuge for those who watched. In the center of the small sanctum, seated against the wall, as if in meditation, were the skeletal remains of one such watcher. Faded gray robes clung to its frame, and in its bony fingers, it clutched two things. One was a leather-bound journal, its cover brittle. The other was a crystal, no larger than her palm, that pulsed with a soft, steady light, the source of the ethereal glow that had drawn her in. With a trembling hand, she gently pried the journal free. The first page she opened spoke of an order founded on a single, desperate principle: to observe the enemy, to learn his movements and his weaknesses, without ever being perceived. They were the silent watchers, the unseen sentinels against the shadow. Above her, the sound of splintering wood and brutish triumph echoed down the stairwell. The orcs had broken into the chamber. Their heavy footfalls thudded directly overhead, and their distorted shadows, cast by torchlight, began to dance across the sanctum's ceiling like monstrous puppets. They were searching for a way down, her breath caught. She looked from the ancient skeleton to the crystal in its grasp. To take them was to accept a legacy, to shoulder a burden that had killed its last bearer. There was no time for doubt. Her fingers closed around the cool, smooth crystal. The moment her skin touched its surface, the sanctum erupted in a silent, blinding flash of pure white light. It was not a light that burned, but one that revealed and concealed all at once. From above came agonized roars as the orcs were momentarily stunned, their vision stolen. But the energy that surged through Elara was a double-edged sword. Along with a wave of clarity and purpose came a chilling dread. She felt the crystal's power not just explode outward, but also lash upward, a psychic shockwave that rippled through the unseen realms. She had not just hidden herself, she had shouted her presence in a language only the most powerful and dark could hear. The disorientation of the orcs was her only chance. Slipping the journal into her tunic and clutching the now dormant crystal, she slipped back through the narrow crack as the clamor above continued. She moved on instinct, climbing a different, collapsed passage that led out to a higher ledge, leaving the ruined outpost behind. But she was not the same elf who had entered. The journal's words were now etched into her mind, speaking of a technique, a secret art called the Sightless Veil. It was the Watcher's greatest tool and her only hope for survival. Its instructions pointed not toward home, but deeper into the shadow, to a place where another of the Order might yet endure. The journal's instructions guided her through a land of nightmares. The dead marshes stretched before her, a vast, stagnant plain, where the water was a sickly green and pale lights flickered just below the surface, luring the unwary with the faces of the long-fallen. The air was thick with a deceptive silence, broken only by the squelch of her own boots in the bog. Following the text's guidance, she held the crystal aloft. It did not blaze with light, but instead hummed softly, and the clinging, hallucinatory mists that writhed around her ankles seemed to recoil, parting to reveal a narrow, precarious path of solid ground through the treacherous waters. She moved with agonizing care, her focus absolute, for a single misstep meant a cold, grasping end. She was not the only soul navigating that blighted ground. A figure emerged from the gloom, with a silence that rivaled her own. A man clad in the worn, travel-stained garb of the Dunedain. His eyes were gray and hard, his hand resting on the hilt of his long sword. He did not speak, but his posture was a clear challenge, his gaze fixed on the crystal in her hand with deep suspicion. "You carry a thing of power in a land that devours hope," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Who are you to walk where the dead reach for the living?" Elara stood her ground, her heart pounding. She was an elf, far from her woodland home, holding an artifact of a forgotten order, and she knew exactly what she must look like to this grim ranger. He saw her not as an ally, but as a servant of the very shadow he had sworn to oppose. The tension between them was a taut wire in the heavy air. Valendil, for that was his name, demanded to know why she risked waking the darkness with such a dangerous object. He had tracked strange energy pulses to these marshes, distortions that tasted of ancient magic and fresh peril. Elara realized with a cold jolt that he was speaking of the crystal's flare in the ruined outpost. She had two choices: flee from this formidable man and cement his belief in her corruption, or take a leap of faith that could get her captured or killed. She chose trust. Slowly, without breaking his gaze, she drew the worn leather journal from her tunic and held it out. The words within speak of an order that sought to guard, not to conquer, she told him. "They are the reason I am here. I seek to continue their watch." Valendil took the journal, his eyes never leaving hers as he carefully turned the brittle pages. He read of the Sightless Veil, of the Watchers who sacrificed their glory for the world's safety. The hardness in his face did not soften, but it shifted into something more calculating, more weary. He handed the journal back. "Your light in the mountains was a beacon," he stated bluntly. "It did not go unnoticed. I have seen them, the 9. They ride closer with each passing day, drawn to the power you unleashed. Your quest is no longer a secret. The enemy's most feared servants are now hunting you." This confirmation struck her with the force of a physical blow. Her desperate gamble had not just alerted common orcs, it had summoned the Nazgûl. Their pursuit was now a race against the uttermost evil. A sudden, cold wind swept across the marshes, carrying with it a faint, chilling sound from the east, the high, piercing cry of a fell beast. The decision was made in that moment, a shared understanding born of immediate peril. "We cannot stay here," Valendil said, his voice low and urgent. "There are tales of a hermit, a master of concealment, who dwells in the shadows of the Ephel Dúath. If any living soul still holds the true knowledge of this veil, it is he. It is a desperate path, but the only one we have." As the mournful cry echoed again, fainter but no less menacing, they turned together, two solitary hunters now bound by a common dread, and fled the spectral waters for the mountains of shadow. The Ephel Dúath were not mountains, but a wall of jagged teeth, biting at a bruised sky. Each handhold was a gamble on crumbling rock, each gust of wind a shove towards the abyss. Valendil led with a ranger's grim certainty, while Elara followed, the crystal in her palm, humming a faint, guiding song. It pulsed with a soft light only they could see, revealing fissures and ledges invisible to the naked eye, a path woven from whispers of ancient magic. High above, the shrieks of Crebain echoed, their black forms circling like vultures waiting for a misstep. One false move, one loose stone kicked free, would bring the entire flock down upon them, alerting every servant of the enemy for leagues. They found the sanctuary not by sight, but by a sudden shift in the air. One moment they clung to a barren cliff face. The next, the rock itself seemed to part like a curtain, revealing a narrow cave entrance that had been perfectly concealed. Inside, the air was still and warm, smelling of stone dust and slow-burning herbs. The hermit awaited them. He was an elf so ancient his skin seemed like parchment stretched over bone, his eyes holding the weary light of centuries. He gave his name as Círdan, and his voice was the dry rustle of dead leaves. "You have brought the storm to my doorstep," he said, his gaze fixed on the crystal in Elara's hand. "That light in the mountains was a fire in the night. They are coming because of you." He did not offer welcome, but a test. With a gesture, he plunged their minds into a vision, not of glorious victory, but of absolute failure. They saw their world swallowed by a darkness so complete it snuffed out the sun, felt the despair of entire cities as hope turned to ash, heard the triumphant shrieks of the Nazgûl as the last bastions of light fell. It was a torment meant to break their will, to show them the true cost of their quest. Elara did not look away. When the vision faded, leaving her trembling, she met the old elf's stern gaze. "We are here to learn, not to hide," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "This crystal is a key. With it, and with your knowledge, the watch can begin again." She offered him the artifact, a symbol of the legacy he had thought lost. "I will be your student. I accept a life of shadows, if it means others may live in the light." Círdan's stern expression did not soften, but a flicker of grim respect lit his ancient eyes. He took the crystal, his long fingers closing around it. "The training will not be a gentle lesson," he warned. "The Sightless veil is not a simple cloak. To hide from the eye, you must mask the very song of your spirit, the heat of your life force. You must become a void, a silence where something once lived. It is a forging of the mind, and if your resolve wavers for even a moment, the backlash could shatter your sanity, leaving you a hollow shell." Even as he spoke, a distant, piercing cry echoed from the peaks outside, a sound that froze the blood. The Nazgûl were closer than any of them had feared. There was no more time for debate. Under Círdan's unyielding gaze, their first lesson began. It was not about movement or stealth, but a brutal, inward focus. He taught them to build walls not of stone, but of will, to still the inner voice that shouts, "I am here," to any who can listen. The mental strain was immediate and excruciating, a pressure building behind their eyes as they fought to suppress their own essence. Outside the illusory cave mouth, the shadow of vast, leathern wings momentarily blotted out the pale light of the moon, a silent reminder that their teacher's most dire warning was already circling overhead. The silence inside the cave was not peaceful, but a taut, straining quiet. Círdan's instructions were not spoken aloud, but pressed directly into their minds, a relentless drill of focus. He taught them to envision a barrier, not of stone or steel, but of pure will, a mental fortress built brick by psychic brick around their innermost selves. The goal was to become a blank space, a void where a living soul should be, invisible to the enemy's searching thought. For Elara, the process was like channeling a familiar, if more refined, magic. Her spirit, accustomed to shaping light, now learned to bend it inward, weaving a shield of brilliant, personal stillness that felt like a second skin. She grasped the concepts with an intuitive speed that drew a slow nod from their ancient teacher, Valendil, however, fought a war within himself. His entire life had been built on a foundation of direct action, of meeting threats with a sharp blade and a defiant stand. This art demanded the opposite, a surrender of presence, a retreat into nothingness that felt perilously close to cowardice. His mind, a warrior's mind, rebelled against the passivity. Each time he tried to construct his psychic wall, it would fracture, his instinct to confront and challenge shattering his own concentration. Frustration simmered in his gray eyes, a silent fury at this enemy he could not simply strike. It was in the midst of this struggle that the world outside their sanctuary turned cold. A palpable dread seeped through the rock itself, a wave of pure oppression that made the very air difficult to breathe. A Nazgûl was passing, its unseen presence a poison scraping against the fabric of reality. Its will, a cold, searching needle, probed the mountainside. The pressure against their nascent shields intensified to an agonizing degree. Elara held, her shield flaring internally like a contained star. Valendil, however, gasped. The invasive presence felt like a physical assault, and his warrior's instinct roared to life. His concentration shattered. For one terrifying second, a flicker of his defiant spirit, his raw "I am here," leaked through his failed defense. The searching presence hesitated, coiling directly outside their hidden cave. Ciriion's mind slammed down over Valendil's like a vault door, sealing the breach with an effort that left the ancient elf visibly strained. They remained frozen, hearts pounding, as the oppressive weight slowly, reluctantly, moved on. The danger had been real and immediate. Valendil looked from Ciriion's weary face to Elara's wide, understanding eyes. His pride lay in tatters. He had nearly doomed them all. The choice was starkly clear. Abandon this path and its subtle war, a war he was failing, or change. He swallowed the bitter draught of humility. "Teach me," he said to Elara, his voice rough. "Show me how to build a shield that does not break." This near disaster forced a brutal acceleration of their training. There was no time for gradual mastery. Cirion revealed the most exhausting demand of the Sightless Veil. The shield could not be lowered, not even in sleep. They had to learn to maintain that psychic wall subconsciously, a constant, draining effort that felt like holding one's breath indefinitely. Their endurance was tested to its limits, their waking hours filled with mental drills, and their sleep fraught with the terror of a lapse. Yet, under this immense pressure, a new resolve was forged. Valendil, guided by Elara's patient insights, learned to frame his shield not as a retreat, but as the ultimate ambush, a patient gathering of strength for a future, decisive strike. As they finally achieved a shaky, constant hold on their personal veils, Cirion watched them, his ancient eyes grave. "Shielding your spirit is only the first step," he warned. "A rock that does not move is still a rock. Now, you must learn to be the wind, to move through his lands without leaving a single ripple for his gaze to find." The night was their new teacher, its shadows a living cloak. Cirion led them from the cave, not with words, but with a thought, a single command to observe and emulate. He did not walk so much as he flowed, his form blurring at the edges, his passage silent as a shift in the wind. He taught them to match their breathing to the rustle of dry leaves, to let their heartbeats sync with the distant rumble of the mountains, to weave their personal veils into the very fabric of the land. They were learning to become part of the silence, not just visitors within it. Their first test appeared as a flicker of firelight and the guttural laughter of orcs in a narrow gully below. Círdan gestured for them to follow him down, moving through the camp's periphery like three ghosts. They were so close Elara could smell the reek of unwashed hides and see the crude tattoos on a sentry's arm. They stood motionless in the deep shadow of a boulder as two orcs argued just feet away, their conversation a grumbling complaint about new orders. More troops were being pulled from the northern fronts, they said, to bolster the defenses of the Black Gate. It was a vital piece of intelligence, a glimpse into the enemy's shifting priorities, gathered without a single blade being drawn. The triumph was short-lived. A low growl rumbled from the darkness. A massive warg, its yellow eyes gleaming, padded into the clearing, its muzzle lifted as it sniffed the air, its head cocked in confusion. It had their scent, but its eyes saw nothing. The three of them froze, their shields straining to contain every whisper of their life force. The beast stalked closer, its hot, foul breath washing over them as it sniffed the ground where Valendil stood. For what felt like hours, they held their positions, muscles screaming, minds locked in a battle of pure will against the animal's primal instinct. The warg was persistent, circling, a low whine of frustration in its throat. It knew something was there. Elara felt the strain in Valendil's stillness, a tremor of impending action. If he broke, they were all dead. Making a choice that felt both reckless and necessary, she focused a sliver of her will into the crystal tucked against her skin. She did not unleash a flare, but a single, subtle pulse of pure white light, invisible to the orcs, but searing directly into the warg's light-starved eyes. The beast recoiled with a pained yelp, shaking its head violently before retreating into the night, unnerved and blinded. The immediate danger had passed. But as they melted back into the deeper shadows, Círdan's gaze was heavy upon her. "You have traded one threat for a greater one," his voice whispered in their minds. That pulse, however small, leaves a mark on the unseen world. The Nine are attuned to such disturbances. They will now be hunting for that specific signature of light. Their successful return to the cave felt hollow. They had proven the power of the veil, gathering crucial information, but the cost was now a beacon on their backs. Inside, Círdan was already unrolling a brittle parchment map onto a smooth stone table. His long, bony finger did not point to their location, or even to the Black Gate. It traced a path along the mountains, across a foul river, and came to rest upon a place that glowed with a sickly, pale light on the aged paper. Minas Morgul. The Tower of Black Sorcery, the very heart of the shadow they now had no choice but to penetrate. The map of Minas Morgul seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of its own. Círdan's hand rested upon it, not as a guide, but as a mourner at a graveside. The time for drills and theory was over. To understand the peril ahead, you must first know the failure behind, he said, his voice a low echo in the quiet cave. And so he told them a story, one he had kept locked in his heart for centuries. After the first fall of Sauron, when the world dared to hope, a secret covenant was formed. The wisest of the elves and the most steadfast of the Dunedain created the Silent Watchers. Their purpose was not glory, but a perpetual, unseen vigil. They were the hidden shield. For a time, they thrived in the shadows, gathering knowledge that kept the land safe. But the shadow has a way of twisting light, he continued, his gaze drifting to Valendil. It found a crack in our foundation, a heart grown envious of the very secrecy it was sworn to uphold. One of our own, a Dunedain lord of high lineage, believed the Order's knowledge should be used not just to watch, but to control, to shape kingdoms. He betrayed our sanctuaries to the enemy's earliest servants. Valendil stood rigid, the name of the traitor, a lord he knew from the songs of his own people, striking him like a physical blow. "That was my ancestor's brother," he whispered, the words thick with a shameful fury. His family line was nearly erased in the purges that followed the betrayal. The anger that surged in him was a hot, familiar fire, threatening to burn away the delicate mental discipline he had so painstakingly built. His hand went to his sword hilt, the desire for a vengeance, 2 ages old, overwhelming the need for silent strength. Elara placed a hand on his arm, her touch cool and steady. "His rage dishonors the dead," she said softly, not to Cirion, but to Valendil. "It blinds you. It is the very weapon that destroyed them. If we are to rebuild this order, our foundation must be trust, not the suspicion that poisoned the first. To hunt for ghosts of traitors now is to repeat their mistake." Valendil's chest heaved with the effort of control. He looked from Elara's earnest face to Cirion's weary one, the weight of his own history crushing him. The righteous path of a ranger was to confront evil, but this new path demanded he forgive a cosmic injustice. With a shuddering breath, he forced his hand away from his sword. "The vengeance I want is a luxury we cannot afford," he conceded, his voice rough, "but the past has just taught us that our greatest enemy may wear a friendly face." The seed of that grim truth was now planted deep within him. Cirion gave a slow, grave nod. The legacy of that betrayal is not just a historical fact. Its patterns endure. The same whispers that corrupted a noble heart then are abroad in the world now. Rebuilding the Watchers means you will be hunted not only by the Dark Lord, but by those who serve his chaos from the shadows, believing their cause is just. The mission into Minas Morgul was no longer just a test of their new skills. It was the first move in a much older, more insidious war. Resolved to learn from the fatal errors of their predecessors, they turned back to the map. Their goal was clear: to slip into the poisonous veil and observe the comings and goings of the Nazgûl, to become the silent witnesses the world once thought extinct. The descent into the veil was a journey into a waking nightmare. The very air shimmered with a sickly, phosphorescent green, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to reach for them with skeletal fingers. They moved as Cirion had taught them, their forms woven into the jagged landscape, their spirits locked down behind walls of will. They were not 3 people, but 3 silences drifting through the corruption. Ghostly sentinels patrolled the crumbling roads, their forms shimmering with the same pale light as the veil itself, but the trio passed like a cold mist, leaving no ripple in the unnatural stillness. Deeper they went, drawn toward a central terrace where a cold, black stone stood like an altar. Around it, 9 towering, cloaked figures gathered, their presence a vortex of dread that made the air itself feel thin and brittle. A voice, disembodied and forged from pure malice, echoed not in their ears, but in the core of their being. It was Sauron, and he spoke of a hunt. He commanded his Nazgûl to find an artifact lost since the First Age, a tool he called the Great Eye, a crystal that could unmask any deception and pierce any veil of shadow or light. The revelation was a cold knife in Elara's chest. She clutched the crystal hidden beneath her tunic, its familiar hum now feeling like a death sentence. As the voice faded, the Witch King, tallest of the nine, did not turn. His hooded gaze simply swept across the terrace, a slow, predatory scan. It passed over their hiding place, then stopped. He had not seen them. He had sensed the void they created, the unnatural emptiness where the land's pervasive gloom should have been. "Something is here," he hissed, a sound like grinding stone. A silence that should not be. "Find it." The command sent a wave of panic through Valendil. His mind screamed for flight, for the clean terror of a sword fight against this suffocating helplessness. He looked to Cirion, his eyes a desperate question. Should they run now, or dare they hold, frozen, to learn the direction of the search? Cirion's ancient face was a mask of strained concentration. He met Valendil's gaze and gave a single, sharp shake of his head. His hand gesture was clear, a retreat. The mission was over. Survival was now the only victory. They withdrew with an agonizing slowness, each step a battle against the instinct to run. The knowledge they carried was both a treasure and a curse. The Great Eye was not a legend. It was real, and it was in Elara's possession. She was no longer just a seeker of secrets. She was the most wanted soul in all of Mordor, the key to her enemy's ultimate victory. As they fled back toward the relative safety of the mountains, the echoing cries of the Nazgûl rising behind them, a single, terrifying truth solidified. They could not outrun this hunt forever. The crystal had to be protected, hidden from a foe who would tear the world apart to find it. The cave felt smaller than before, its walls pressing in with the weight of their terrible discovery. Valendil turned on Cirion, his voice a low, controlled tremor of fury. You knew that crystal was this Great Eye, and you sent her into the heart of their fortress holding it. Was this a test or a sacrifice? His hand, though empty, twitched at his side as if grasping for a sword that was not there. The old betrayal, the ghost of the Dunedain lord who had shattered the First Order, now seemed to stare out from Ciriion's weary eyes. You used her as bait. Cirion did not flinch, but the lines on his face deepened. I feared the truth would shape your path, he admitted, his rustling voice stripped of its usual authority. To know you carried a prize the Dark Lord would burn continents to reclaim, that knowledge has broken greater wills than yours. I chose the path I believed would forge you, not frighten you away. The confession landed not as wisdom, but as a profound manipulation. Elara felt the ground of her trust in him crack. Her teacher, her guide, had deemed her too fragile for the full weight of her own destiny. This is the same poison that destroyed your First Order, Valendil shot back, his anger finding a sharp, true target. You hoard secrets, thinking only you are wise enough to bear them. Look where that led. Stop. Elara's voice cut through the tension, quiet but absolute. She stepped between them, her gaze moving from Valendil's raw outrage to Cirion's guarded shame. The crystal felt heavy against her skin, its hum a constant reminder that she, not her teacher, was now the guardian of this legacy. Cirion's methods were born from ancient failure, but they were a failure she would not repeat. The watch continues, but it continues with trust, she declared. There will be no more hidden truths. From this moment, I will decide our path. The shift in the cave was palpable. The mantle of leadership passed silently from the ancient master to the young apprentice. Círdan gave a slow, acknowledging nod, the respect in his eyes now mixed with a newfound wariness. Valendil, though his pride still smoldered, saw the steel in Elara's resolve and yielded. The burden was now hers, a crushing weight of command that settled on her shoulders as the cries of the Nazgûl echoed faintly in the distance. With their roles redefined and their resolve painfully reforged, they turned to the map. "We cannot hide from a hunt, this determined," Elara stated, her finger tracing a route far to the south, away from their mountain sanctuary. "So we will not hide. We will give them a hunt. We will lead them on a chase for a phantom. Valendil, your skills as a ranger will be our brush. We will create a trail, a story of a lone elf fleeing with a precious artifact, one so compelling the Nine cannot ignore it. It is a desperate gamble, a dance on the edge of a blade, but it is the only move that might draw their gaze away from the truth she now carried." Valendil's plan was a masterpiece of misdirection. He would become the ghost of a rumor, a flicker of false hope for the enemy to chase. With Círdan's help, he crafted a replica of the Great Eye from common quartz and river stone, imbuing it with just enough latent energy to mimic a faint, alluring signature. More dangerous was his own role. He would not use the perfected Sightless veil, but a flawed, flickering version of it, a shroud that would occasionally fail, allowing glimpses of his spirit and the false artifact to leak out like bait. It was a role that played directly against every instinct he possessed, requiring him to be both hunter and prey, visible and invisible, all at once. He was volunteering to become the most wanted man in Middle-earth. The northern wastes became his stage. He led the two pursuing Nazgûl on a desperate, winding chase across barren plateaus and through icy ravines. He was a phantom just beyond their grasp. His trail, a carefully laid tapestry of broken twigs, disturbed gravel, and the faint, tantalizing echo of the decoy crystal's power. He used every trick of the Dunedain, moving only at night, hiding his tracks in streambeds and pushing his body to its absolute limit. For days, it was a grim, exhausting dance, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the cold dread that followed him like a shroud. The plan was working, but it was a victory measured in inches, with the shadow of the fell beasts forever darkening the sky behind him. The river was his undoing. It was a wide, churning torrent of meltwater, its banks sheer and rocky. He had just reached the far side, his muscles burning with fatigue, when a piercing shriek split the air. A Nazgûl, its fell beast diving from a hidden crag in the cliffs, was upon him. There was no time for stealth, no room for the veil. Valendil drew his sword, the cold steel a familiar comfort in his hand. As the monstrous creature swooped down, talons extended, he did not flinch. He met the charge, his blade a silver arc in the dim light. The move was impossibly daring, a ranger's last stand. His sword bit deep into the beast's leathery wing, and a screech of agony and fury echoed across the canyon. But as the creature recoiled, one of its talons caught him across the chest, tearing through leather and flesh with the force of a hammer blow. He stumbled back, his world narrowing to a white-hot agony. Gasping on the rocky shore, he saw the second Nazgûl descending to cut off his retreat. He was cornered, wounded, and the deception was on the verge of collapse. If they captured him and the decoy, They would soon realize the crystal was a fake, and their gaze would snap back to Elara. In that moment of absolute peril, his choice was made. There was no grand speech, no final curse. With the last of his strength, he raised the false crystal high and channeled a burst of his own life force into it. The replica could not withstand the power. It erupted in a silent, blinding flash of white light, shattering into 1,000 harmless shards of dust. The light was a final, defiant message, a signal that the prize was destroyed, the trail was gone. He had sacrificed his only chance of escape to make the lie believable. Miles away, sheltered in a shallow cave, Elara gasped and clutched her chest. A wave of searing pain and desperate resolve slammed into her through their fragile psychic bond, followed by a sudden, chilling silence. Ciriion's eyes snapped open, his face grim. He has played his part to the end, the old elf whispered. The Nazgûl will be enraged by the trick. Their hunt for us will now be fueled by a personal vendetta. But Elara was already on her feet, her own fear eclipsed by a fierce, protective certainty. We feel his silence, but we do not know if it is the end, she said, her voice trembling with resolve. I will not let his sacrifice become his funeral. He drew them away for us. Now we must turn and walk straight into the storm he created. We are going after him. The canyon walls echoed with the shrieks of the Nazgûl, a sound that twisted the very air. Elara and Cirion found Valendil backed against a sheer rock face, his chest a bloody mess, his sword held in a trembling hand as a fell beast circled for another strike. There was no time for a direct assault. Their only weapons were silence and shadow, while Cirion focused his will, creating a complex mirage of Elara's form, flickering with light further down the gorge. Elara herself reached out with her mind to the unstable cliffs above. She did not push with physical force, but with a subtle pressure against key fractures, urging the mountain to betray its own. A controlled rockslide thundered down, not to crush, but to isolate, sending a curtain of dust and rubble between Valendil and his hunters. In that moment of confusion, they moved. They were not two figures running, but a sudden shift in the landscape, appearing at Valendil's side and pulling him into the deceptive safety of a fissure just as the dust settled. The rescue was a desperate success, but the cost was written on Cirion's face. He sagged against the stone, his breathing shallow, the vibrant light in his eyes dimmed to a feeble glow. The effort of maintaining such potent illusions while also holding his own veil had drained him profoundly. My strength ebbs, he confessed, his voice a dry whisper. This art, it is tied to a magic that is leaving this world. My time as your guide is ending. The sanctuary was lost. The Nazgûl had not seen them, but they had witnessed the method, the clever interplay of light and earth. They now knew the signature of their enemy's tactics, and the general location of their mountain refuge was compromised. They had to flee, and immediately. Looking from her wounded companion to her fading mentor, Elara made the only choice that offered a glimmer of hope. We go to Lothlórien, she stated. The Golden Wood is protected by a power even the enemy fears. Its lady may offer us sanctuary and perhaps healing. The decision raised the stakes to a terrifying degree. Cirion's decline meant Elara would soon be the sole bearer of the Watcher's knowledge, a leader before she felt ready. And the path to Lórien was its own trial, a journey that would skirt the very borders of Dal Guldur, the dark tower in southern Mirkwood, where Sauron's shadow lay deep and watchful. Bearing their injured and their dying guide, they turned their backs on the mountains of shadow and set out toward the ancient forest, a desperate company carrying a fragile hope into a land of growing darkness. The Golden Wood was a fortress of living light. Under the canopy of Melian, the very air seemed to shimmer with a palpable peace, a stark contrast to the blighted lands they had fled. But their arrival was not met with open arms. Silent, grim-faced Galadrim led the weary, blood-stained trio to the heart of Caras-Galadhin, where the Lady Galadriel awaited them, her presence as immense and calm as the ancient forest itself. She did not speak, but her eyes held them, weighing the shadow that clung to their spirits. Without a word, she led them to a basin of silver filled with clear water. "Look into the mirror," she commanded, her voice both gentle and absolute. The water swirled, and visions rose not of the future, but of their deepest truths. They saw their own fears, their moments of weakness and resolve, the flicker of Valendil's anger, and the weight of Elara's burden. And then the mirror focused on the crystal, revealing its core not as a simple tool, but as a sliver of pure, unmarred light, a fragment of a glory lost to legend. "You carry a shard of a Silmaril," Galadriel stated, the name hanging in the air like a sacred bell. "Its power is not merely to hide, but to reveal all deception, to unmask any lie. It is a light that could cleanse the shadows, or draw the entire wrath of Mordor down upon us." A murmur of alarm spread through her council. A stern elf lord stepped forward. "The artifact must remain here, under our guard," he insisted. "To let them leave with it is to invite ruin upon Lothlórien. We cannot risk our people for this doomed quest." Elara felt the sanctuary she so desperately needed slipping away. She met Galadriel's unwavering gaze, her own voice clear and steady despite her exhaustion. "My lady, the old Watchers fell because they were alone. We ask not for an army, but for a place to heal and to plan. We vow to operate from the deepest shadows, to be a shield for your realm, not a sword that draws danger to it." The watch must continue, but it cannot be rebuilt in a cave. She was no longer a student pleading for help, but a leader negotiating an alliance. Galadriel's eyes softened with a profound, weary understanding. She saw the echo of her own long struggle against the shadow in Elara's resolve. "The light you carry is a burden I know well," she said. "You shall have our sanctuary. But know this, the fate of the Golden Wood is now bound to your success. Should you fail, the darkness you flee will not stop at our borders." The stakes had just become immeasurable. With the formal agreement made, the atmosphere shifted. Círdan was gently taken by healers, his ancient form finally finding rest. Valendil's wounds were tended with skill, the poison of the Nazgûl's dread slowly cleansed from his spirit. And for Elara, a new chapter began. Galadriel took her aside, away from the council and its politics. "The light within you is the same light that fuels the Silmaril shard," she explained. "You have been using it as a lamp in the dark, but it can become the very air you breathe. To perfect the Sightless veil, you must not fight your nature, but become so aligned with it that you and the light are one. Your shield must not be a wall, but a perfect reflection of the world around you, making you invisible not by absence, but by perfect harmony." This was a revelation that redefined everything Elara thought she knew. The training Círdan had given her was a foundation of stone and will. What Galadriel offered was a mastery of the wind and the light itself. The light in Lothlórien was a living thing, and Elara learned to breathe it in. Under Galadriel's patient guidance, her understanding of the Sightless Veil transformed. It was no longer a fortress wall built through sheer force of will, but a seamless blending of her own spirit with the world around her. She learned to let her inner light, the same essence that pulsed within the Silmaril shard, flow outward not as a beacon, but as a gentle, cleansing tide. She did not hide from the shadow. She simply allowed the light to exist so completely within her that it rendered her invisible by its very perfection. One afternoon, drawn to the forest's edge where a patch of trees stood gnarled and sickly from a lingering touch of Dál Guldur's malice, she did not just raise her veil. She let this new harmony flow from her, a soft, radiant exhale that washed over the blighted earth. The gray moss shrouding the roots withered and fell away. The twisted branches seemed to sigh, straightening as their leaves regained a hint of their lost gold. It was a passive restoration, a quiet proof that the Watchers could be gardeners of hope as well as guardians of secrets. This small miracle did not go unnoticed. Deep within the dark tower to the south, the sorcerer felt the subtle shift. A patch of his influence had been not just repelled, but purified, erased with a finality that spoke of a power he had not felt in an age. He dispatched his servants, not armies, but formless shades that slipped between the trees, probing the borders of the golden wood for the source of this purifying light. Valendil, his body healed but his instincts honed by his recent ordeal, saw the threat immediately. "We must cut the head from the snake," he argued, his hand resting on his sword. "Let me hunt these spies before they report back. A direct strike is the only language they understand." Elara saw the same danger, but she saw a greater opportunity. "If we attack, we confirm their suspicions and reveal our nature," she countered. "But if we mislead them, we protect our secret and learn their methods." Her plan was one of elegant deception, while Valendil and a few trusted Galadrim created a convincing, noisy spectacle of an elven patrol, discovering and banishing a minor shadow near the opposite border. Elara used her refined veil. She did not hide herself. Instead, she crafted a phantom echo of the cleansing light, a brilliant but empty signature that she placed deep within a treacherous, trackless marsh miles from their true location. The shadowy spies, drawn to this decoy like moths to a flame, spent days fruitlessly searching the bog before their forms dissipated, their mission a failure. They reported only a fleeting, unconfirmed trace of power, nothing solid enough to warrant a greater assault. This victory was a quiet testament to their growth. They had countered a direct probe from Dál Guldur without revealing their true capabilities, proving the new order's effectiveness as a subtle, strategic force. Yet their success came with a price. They were no longer merely fugitives. They were a confirmed anomaly, a priority target for the sorcerer's curiosity and wrath. Their sanctuary in Lórien was secure for now, but it could not remain their only stronghold. The original Watchers fell because they were too few and too isolated. With their skills refined and their purpose clear, Elara and Valendil began to seek out others. They listened for whispers on the wind, stories of lone dwarves who defied the shadows in their deep halls, of mortal hunters who knew the secret paths, of other elves who preferred the quiet watch to the open war. One by one, they extended their trust, inviting these steadfast souls to join them, to formally re-establish the unseen sentinels and weave a new, stronger shield for a world darkening by the day. The message was a whisper of wind through dead grass, a pattern of broken twigs left on a riverbank, known only to outcasts. Elara and Valendil found Kara first, an Easterling scout with eyes as hard as flint. Standing over the remains of an orc patrol she had slain not in glorious battle, but with silent, efficient cuts. She had abandoned the war machines of the East, disillusioned by the empty promises of a dark lord who saw her people as fodder. When Valendil, a descendant of her people's ancient foes, stepped from the shadows, her hand went to her curved blade. Trust was not given, it was a blade's edge away from being severed. "We are not here to fight the wars of the past," Elara said, her voice calm amidst the tension. "We are building a shield for the future, and for that, we need your eyes." Cirion was a different kind of ghost, a sylvan elf who had turned her back on the great forests, finding solace in the deep, untamed wilds where the trees themselves held their breath. She moved through the canopy without a sound, her presence no more substantial than dappled sunlight. Her distrust was not of race, but of any structure beyond her own solitary watch. To join an order felt like putting on chains she had fought for centuries to shed. Yet the artifact Elara carried, the pure light of the Silmaril shard, called to something ancient and resilient within her spirit. Bringing them together in a secluded glade was like mixing fire and shadow. Kara believed in preemptive action, in studying an enemy's weakness to strike it decisively. Lirien's philosophy was one of perfect evasion, to be so unseen that conflict never arose. This fundamental clash ignited during a night exercise, a drill in silent movement through the western eaves of Mirkwood. A Dal Guldur patrol, larger than expected, stumbled into their designated training ground. Kara's instinct was immediate, to melt into the terrain and identify the officer for a swift, silent takedown to sow confusion. Cirion hissed a warning, her entire being recoiling from the unnecessary risk. A single kill could reveal their presence more surely than a shouted oath. The argument, though conducted in hushed, furious tones, caused a critical delay. The patrol's warg caught the scent of their indecision, its head snapping toward their hiding place. Only a sudden, unnatural rustling of leaves conjured by Elara's will, a distraction mimicking a fleeing animal, drew the beast's attention away at the last second. The failure was a cold dose of reality. In the aftermath, Elara did not chastise. She assigned them a paired mission, a scouting run along the very border they had just compromised. "You will go together," she instructed, her tone leaving no room for debate. "Kara, your task is to map their patrol patterns and numbers. Cirion, your duty is to ensure neither of you are ever perceived. You will not return until you have both succeeded." Forced into reliance, the two recruits found their rhythm in the field. Kara's sharp eyes identified the sentry posts and the timing of the rotations, while Lirion's preternatural stealth guided them through impossible gaps in the watch, her knowledge of the forest allowing them to use the very roots and shifting shadows as cover. When a stray goblin nearly stumbled upon them, it was Kara who immobilized it with a swift, silent blow, and Cirion, who immediately masked the slight disturbance with a carefully arranged cascade of falling pine needles. They returned with flawless intelligence and a newfound, grudging respect forged in shared peril. This successful integration was a fragile victory. It proved the Order could be rebuilt from the shattered remnants of Middle-earth's conflicts, a tapestry woven from threads of elf, man, and Easterling. Yet every new thread, every new strength, also expanded their footprint in a world riddled with unseen eyes. Their small company was no longer a secret held by 3, but a conspiracy shared by 5. As the new Watchers completed their foundational training, Cirion summoned them to his Sicht. His voice was a faint echo, but his will remained unbroken. "You have passed the first test," he whispered, his gaze taking in each of them. "Now you must build a sentinel that will outlive us all. Your first decree is to establish a watchtower, not of stone and mortar, but of living vigilance. Find a place where the great river bends, a hidden perch from which you can observe the comings and goings of the shadow, and where the light you carry can be guarded and one day used." The cliffs above the great river offered no welcome, only sheer rock and a constant, biting wind. Here, in this forgotten vertical wilderness, the new Watchers began to build. They did not quarry stone or raise scaffolds in the traditional sense. Instead, using skills taught by Cirion and refined by Lirien's woodcraft, they worked the stone itself, coaxing existing fissures to widen into passages and smoothing natural ledges into floors. Elven masonry was a subtle art, binding existing rock with whispered songs of power, making their tower not a structure upon the cliff, but a part of it. Day by day, they wove the sightless veil into the very stone, a permanent, shimmering field of illusion that rendered the watchtower a mere blur of shadow and moving cloud to any eye looking up from the river or down from the sky. It was to be their first true home, a hidden eye staring directly into the shadowed lands to the east. The silence of their work was shattered one afternoon by the distinct, gruff cadence of dwarven voices echoing up from the riverbank far below. A small caravan, likely traders from the lonely mountain, had made camp, and their scouts were now climbing the lower slopes, heading directly for the concealed construction site. Panic was a cold touch. An open confrontation would shatter their secrecy, but so would being discovered. Valendil's hand went to his axe, his mind racing through scenarios of quiet deterrence. Kara nocked an arrow, her gaze calculating angles of threat. But Elara raised a hand, her decision made in an instant. "We will not drive them away with fear," she stated. "We will guide them with dreams," while Lírien and Kara used their veils to create shimmering mirages of impassable terrain and the distant, enticing calls of river fowl leading away from the site. Elara focused on the dwarves' real problem. She had seen the massive landslide that had blocked their intended path along the river. Focusing her will, she reached out to the unstable pile of rock and earth. It was not a grand display of power, but a surgeon's touch, a subtle shifting of weight and balance, with a low rumble that the dwarves could easily attribute to natural causes. A section of the slide gracefully slumped aside, clearing a narrow but viable passage. The dwarven scouts, confused by the shifting landscape and the sudden opening, muttered prayers to their ancestors for the fortuitous clearance and turned their party back toward the river, never knowing they had been silently herded from peril by unseen hands. Elara's act was more than mere misdirection. It was the planting of a seed, an unseen thread of goodwill, connecting her hidden order to the wider world. With the immediate threat averted, the Watchtower was completed, a silent sentinel woven into the mountain's flesh. From its highest perch, they could see the traffic of the Anduin, and on clear days, the dim glow of Dal Guldur to the north, and the palpable shadow of Minas Morgul to the east. The tower became their nerve center, a place where the disparate skills of its guardians fused into a single, potent instrument. Valendil and Kara charted the timing and composition of orc patrols with a ranger's patience and a soldier's eye. Lothlórien learned to read the subtle corruptions in the water and air, sensing the passage of dark things long before they crested the horizon. The strategic value of this perch was immeasurable, but that very value made it a powder keg. Its discovery would not merely mean their end. It would draw the combined wrath of two of Sauron's greatest strongholds down upon them, turning their sanctuary into a tomb. One evening, as the river below flowed like a ribbon of molten lead in the twilight, Lothlórien's sharp ears caught a whisper on the wind, a fragment of a guttural message from a passing orc messenger boat. She focused, her entire being becoming an ear, and the words became clear. They spoke of a muster, a legion of unprecedented size, gathering in the deep vales of Gorgoroth. This was not a routine patrol, but the forging of a spearhead. The message was fragmented, its ultimate target unknown, but the intent was chillingly clear. The shadow was preparing to strike, and the Watchers were the only ones who knew. The silent flow of intelligence they had nurtured now carried a warning that could mean the difference between a kingdom's survival and its utter ruin. The intelligence was a poison in their veins. The muster in Gorgoroth was not a routine gathering. It was a sharpened blade aimed directly at the heart of the Golden Wood. Kara paced the hidden watchtower, her movements sharp with frustration. "We have the proof," she argued, her voice low and intense. "We go to the lady and her commanders, show them the troop movements, and stand with them on the wall. An open alliance is the only way to ensure they believe us and are ready." Lothlórien stood like a sapling in a storm, her form tense. "To reveal ourselves is to burn the only shield we have. The moment they know our faces and our methods, the enemy will know them too. This tower becomes a ruin, and our work ends before it has truly begun. We send a whisper, nothing more." Elara listened to the storm within her own ranks, the same conflict that had shattered the First Order. Kara saw a battle to be won, Lothlórien a secret to be kept. Elara saw people who needed to be saved without dooming their saviors. She would not choose one path over the other. She would forge a new one. "We will warn them, but we will not stand with them," she declared, her decision settling the tension in the room. "We will give them the weapon of foreknowledge, while we remain the hand that wields it from the shadows." Her plan was one of elegant deception. They would not deliver a scroll or a spoken message. Instead, they would create a trail of evidence, so compelling the Galadrim could not ignore it. Valendil, using his ranger skills, would leave the carefully dismembered body of a Mordor messenger crow in a location where a Lothlórien patrol was certain to find it. Tied to its leg was a fragment of a battlefield map, one Kara had seen in the vision, detailing the planned assault routes. Lothlórien would then use her connection to the forest, guiding the patrols with subtle shifts in the wind and the behavior of animals toward the grisly discovery. The message would appear to be a lucky find, a piece of enemy incompetence, not a gift from a hidden ally. The gamble was immense. If the Galadrim dismissed the find as a ruse, Lothlórien would burn. If they investigated too deeply and traced the manipulation back to its source, the Watchers would be exposed. For 3 agonizing days, they watched from their perch as the golden wood seemed to slumber. Then the change began. It was subtle at first, a shift in the patrol patterns, a reinforcement of the northern fences. Then came the silent mobilization of the March Wardens, the elite guardians of the wood, moving into concealed positions along the predicted attack routes. The Galadrim were preparing for war, and they were doing so without a single public proclamation. They had believed the anonymous warning. A profound relief washed through the Watchtower, tempered by a sobering realization. They had successfully acted as a shield. Their first true test passed, but the victory was cold. The Orc Legion still gathered, its threat undiminished. As Lórien quietly girded itself for the coming storm, the Watchers turned their gaze east, toward the source of the malice. Their intelligence pointed to a single, chilling figure, a new Orc commander of terrifying efficiency, who was whipping the disparate hordes of Mordor into a unified, deadly spear. This was no mere chieftain. This was a strategist, and he had just become their primary target. The air in the Orc encampment was a thick stew of smoke, sweat, and seared meat. Elara and Valendil moved through the chaotic sprawl of tents and crude forges like 2 breaths of wind, their sightless veils making them phantoms amidst the brutish celebration. At the camp's heart, surrounded by a ring of massive Yurok high, stood the source of this newfound discipline. Gorgal was not like the common Orc chieftains who ruled through raw strength alone. His eyes held a cunning, calculating light as he barked orders, his voice a grating stone that silenced the grumbling of rival chieftains. He had unified these fractious tribes not just with the whip, but with a chilling vision of the plunder that awaited them in the Golden Wood. Yet his gaze kept flicking toward a smaller, secluded tent, its entrance guarded by 2 orcs who stood with an unnerving stillness. From within that tent, a figure emerged, shrouded in a travel-stained cloak that hid its features. It did not speak, but gestured with a long-fingered hand, and Gorgal immediately ceased his harangue to listen. A faint shimmer of magic, old and intricate, hung in the air around the cloaked form, a power that felt hauntingly familiar to Elara. It was a craft of subtlety and grace, a stark perversion of elven magic. This was the traitor's legacy made flesh, an insider whispering their weaknesses to the enemy. The shock of the revelation sent a tremor through Valendil. The old wound on his chest, a constant reminder of his sacrifice, gave a sudden, sharp throb of pain. For a single, catastrophic second, his focus shattered. His veil flickered, and the briefest whisper of his spirit, a ranger's defiant presence, leaked into the oppressive air. Gorgal's head snapped around, his brutish nostrils flaring as if he had caught a scent. His yellow eyes scanned the empty space where they stood, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Something is here," he snarled, his hand closing around the hilt of a massive scimitar. The cloaked advisor went rigid, a hand rising as if to cast a spell of revelation. There was no time for stealth, only flight. Elara gripped Valendil's arm, pulling him back as she pushed her own veil to its limit, weaving a complex illusion of a sudden, sharp gust of wind, kicking up dust and loose pebbles around them. In that momentary distraction, they melted backward, slipping between tents and fading into the deeper shadows at the camp's edge, their hearts hammering against their ribs. Safe for the moment but shaken, they knew this changed everything. "We cannot simply watch the army," Elara whispered, her mind racing. "That advisor knows our arts, our strategies. They can teach Gorgal how to pierce the very defenses of Lórien. To stop this, we must unmask the shadow in the cloak." The path ahead was terrifyingly clear. They had to follow the trail of corruption to its source, deep into the land where no light could survive. Back within the illusory safety of their watchtower, the dire news settled like a pall. The enemy had a mind, a cunning strategist, guided by a hand that understood light as well as shadow. To identify this advisor, to learn their purpose, would require a mission of suicidal audacity. It meant leaving the relative safety of the river and walking straight into the heart of the shadow, to the one place even the Nazgûl called home. The next phase of their watch would take them to the foot of the Dark Tower itself. The shadow of Barad-dûr fell upon them like a physical weight, a suffocating gloom that choked the very air. Valendil and Kara moved through the outer precincts, their forms hidden beneath the sightless veil and the reeking disguise of captured orc uniforms. The crude armor chafed against their skin, a constant reminder of the precipice they walked. Posing as messengers from the Gorgoroth front, they navigated the chaotic yards, their eyes and ears straining to absorb every detail. The air vibrated with the rhythmic hammering of forges and the guttural shouts of overseers, a symphony of industry dedicated solely to death. It was in a cavernous chamber, carved from the black rock, that they found their target. Gorgal stood beside a cloaked figure and the terrifying specter of a Nazgûl, its form wavering in the torchlight. The plans they overheard turned their blood to ice. The assault on Lórien's northern border was a feint, a massive diversion. While the Galadrim were fully engaged, a second elite force would cross the Anduin far to the south and strike the wood's undefended flank, a killing blow from an unexpected direction. This was the critical intelligence they had come for, a truth that could save an entire realm. But then a voice, sharp with recognition, cut through the din. An Easterling captain, a man Kara had once called a brother-in-arms before her disillusionment, pointed a gloved finger directly at her. "Your eyes have not changed, traitor," he snarled, his hand moving to his sword. The veil could hide their spirits, but it could not entirely erase the familiar set of a warrior's stance from a former comrade's gaze. In that heartbeat, their mission shattered. Valendil did not hesitate. With a shove, he sent a stack of spear shafts, clattering into a nearby brazier. The ignited oil spread with terrifying speed, creating a wall of flame and chaos between them and their accusers. It was a desperate, noisy diversion that saved their lives but sacrificed all secrecy. Alarms erupted throughout the fortress, a cacophony of horns and roars that signaled a breach. They fled through the suddenly panicked crowds, the heat of the fire at their backs, and the chilling knowledge that the entire Dark Tower was now awake and hunting for them. They escaped with the vital warning of the southern attack, but the cost was catastrophic. Barad-dûr was now on the highest alert, and the cloaked advisor knew with certainty that a new, unseen enemy was piercing their secrets. The hunt for the Watchers had just become intensely personal. Racing back toward the Golden Wood with this dire news, they faced an impossible task. They had to convince the Lady Galadriel to split her defenses, to weaken the northern wall, facing the obvious threat, in order to reinforce a silent, southern border. It was a strategic gamble that, if their intelligence was wrong, would lead to the utter ruin of Lothlórien. The weight of a kingdom's survival now rested entirely on the truth they carried, and their ability to make a reclusive power trust the whispers of ghosts. The air in the chamber of Caras-Galadhon was thick with disbelief and the scent of aged wood. Elara stood before Galadriel and her stern-faced commanders, the weight of their gazes a heavier burden than any pack she had carried. She did not offer a report of words, for words could be doubted. Instead, she raised the Silmaril shard, and its light bloomed not to blind, but to reveal. The chamber walls dissolved into a panoramic vision of the twin orc armies, the obvious northern feint, and the hidden southern blade, all seen through the Watcher's unseen eyes. The commanders watched the disciplined movements in Gorgoroth, the efficient construction of river rafts far to the south, and the chilling figure of the cloaked advisor, their own tactics and weaknesses laid bare in the spectral tableau. The silence that followed was more powerful than any outcry. Galadriel's voice cut through it. The vision is true. We must divide our strength. But a grizzled marchwarden captain stepped forward, his eyes narrowed at Elara. You ask us to weaken our main wall on the word of a handful of phantoms. If you can see this threat so clearly, then you must be the ones to blunt it. The demand was a test, a challenge to their value that went beyond mere observation. The fate of the wood cannot rest on whispers alone. Prove your order can strike as well as it watches. Cripple the southern army's supply line. Elara met his challenging stare, the light of the Silmaril still fading from her palm. She felt the precariousness of their position, balanced between the trust they had earned and the tangible proof these warriors required. We accept this charge, she said, her voice unwavering. The Watchers will ensure the southern spear strikes empty air. We will break their supply chain, not with armies, but with confusion and ruin. It was a pledge that committed them to a new, dangerous kind of war, one of sabotage and misdirection that would push their every skill to the limit. The survival of Lothlórien and the very future of their reborn order now hinged on their ability to wage a battle no one would ever see. As the silver and gray host of the Galadrim began its silent, purposeful movement to reinforce the northern fences, the small band of Watchers turned away from the mustering power. They did not march. They simply dissolved into the deepening shadows under the Malorn trees, a ripple of intent moving south toward the great river, their silent war now begun. The southern camp was a sprawling scar on the riverbank, a testament to the enemy's grim efficiency. Under the cover of a moonless night, the Watchers became instruments of its unraveling. Lírien moved like a current through the fetid water supply, her hands releasing a subtle, sickening taint into the barrels, a brew of bog rot and fever dream herbs that would not kill, but would cripple an army with weakness and delirium. Meanwhile, Kara slipped among the crude siege towers and catapults, her touch a study in sabotage. A carefully placed wedge loosened here, a critical rope fiber frayed to breaking there, her work invisible until the moment of greatest strain. As these physical blows fell, Valendil and Elara wove a more insidious attack. Using the Sightless veil not to hide, but to project, they created flickering phantoms in the periphery of the orc's vision, spectral elven warriors that melted into mist and the mournful echoes of forgotten battle horns. The camp, a well-oiled machine moments before, descended into a seething cauldron of paranoia. Fights erupted over imagined slights. A soldier who drank from a tainted barrel would suddenly lash out at his comrade, seeing a monstrous apparition. The siege equipment, tested under the panic, groaned and splintered under its own weight. The orcs were turning on each other, their march delayed not by a wall of spears, but by a plague of their own fear. This carefully orchestrated chaos, however, was a beacon. From the command tent, the cloaked advisor emerged, not with the blind rage of the orcs, but with a cold, methodical purpose. He moved against the tide of the panic, his gaze sweeping the camp not for phantoms, but for the silence that created them. He was hunting the saboteurs. Elara felt the pursuit like a drop in temperature. Slipping into a darkened supply tent to regroup, she found herself face to face with him. The air crackled. He did not shout in alarm, but simply lunged, his movements a fluid, deadly echo of her own elven training. In the frantic struggle, a rack of spears clattered down between them. As he sidestepped, his hood fell back. The face revealed in the dim light was not that of a man corrupted or some unknown horror. It was an elf, his features noble and sharp, but his eyes held a cold, ancient light she had only seen in the most jaded of her kindred. She knew him. He was Lord Celebrindor, a lore master of renown who had vanished during the fall of a region centuries ago, believed slain by the enemy. The shock was a physical blow, freezing her for a critical second. Here was not a servant of the shadow, but one of its architects, a poison from within their own most sacred circles. Valendil and Kara burst into the tent, weapons drawn, seeing her hesitation. "Capture him," Valendil urged, his voice a tight wire of tension. "We could learn everything." But Celebrindor was already recoiling, a bitter smile on his lips as he called out in the black speech, alerting the entire camp to their location. The choice was agonizingly clear: pursue a ghost from a tragic past and risk losing her entire team, or live to fight with the terrible knowledge she now possessed. "We fall back now," Elara commanded, her voice cutting through the rising clamor outside. They melted into the night as the tent flap was torn open by enraged orcs, leaving a furious Celebrindor to his deception. Regrouping at the hidden rendezvous point, the weight of the revelation settled upon them like a shroud. The enemy was not just a foreign darkness. It was a betrayal woven into the very tapestry of their heritage, a rot that had festered for ages in the highest councils of the wise. To confront him now was to begin a war within a war, one that would demand they question every alliance and trust no one but themselves. The Silmaril shard pulsed with a soft, insistent light in Elara's palm, its glow a silent promise of revelation. She chose a secluded glade deep within the golden wood, a place where the trees themselves seemed to stand as witnesses, and there she confronted the phantom from her past. Lord Celebrindor stood before her, his noble features a mask of cold defiance. But as Elara focused the shard's pure light upon him, that mask began to crack and splinter. The light did not burn him, it unmade his deceptions, peeling back centuries of lies to reveal the rot of despair festering within. He was not a conqueror, but a prisoner of his own sorrow, a once great lord who had bargained his allegiance to the Dark Lord in a desperate, damned bid to escape the weary burden of his immortal life. He confessed it all, his voice a hollow echo. He had betrayed the original Watchers out of a jealous rage, furious that their secret power was withheld from him, and terrified of a future that promised only endless struggle. Now he sought the Silmaril shard to complete a ritual for his master, a working of such profound darkness it would cast a permanent veil of despair over all of Middle-earth, extinguishing hope itself. His words were a poison, and he wielded them with a surgeon's precision. Turning to Valendil, his eyes gleaming with malice, he whispered of Elara's growing power, of the way the light obeyed her, of the danger of a single soul wielding such a force unchecked. "Is she your leader, or your coming master?" he hissed. "Can you truly trust one who holds a sliver of a god's fire in her hand?" For a terrible moment, Valendil faltered, the old scars of betrayal and the fresh memory of his own near-fatal mistake warring with his hard-won trust. He saw not Elara, but the potential for a new shadow, a tyranny of light, and his hand tightened on his sword hilt. Elara did not argue. She did not plead. She simply turned the shard, and its light shifted from a piercing beam to a vast, gentle mirror. She reflected not Celebrion's lies, but his own inner truth, the shriveled, lonely spirit that had traded fellowship for a hollow promise. "Look upon your kingdom," she whispered, her voice resonating with the light. "See the emptiness you purchased with your soul." Celebrion stared into that luminous mirror, and for the first time in centuries, he saw himself not as a wronged prince, but as a pitiful, broken creature. A strangled cry escaped his lips, not of anger, but of agonizing recognition. The grand tower of his resentment crumbled into dust, leaving only the shame of what he had willingly become. His breakdown laid their enemy's plan bare. Sauron's ritual was not a distant threat. It was imminent, a storm gathering to break upon the world. Only a unified front, a concert of many lights standing together, could hope to counter such a concentrated darkness. As Galadriel's silent guards emerged from the trees to take the broken elf lord into custody, he uttered one final, devastating truth. The ritual requires a focal point, a place of power woven with the very essence of its opposition. He looked at Elara, a last flicker of spite in his defeated eyes. "He has chosen your own sanctuary, the heart of your new order. The Watchtower you built will be the epicenter of the world's unmaking." The sky above the Watchtower curdled into a vortex of bruised purple and absolute black. This was not a storm of wind and rain, but a tempest of pure despair, a psychic assault launched by a furious Dark Lord. The very air grew heavy and thick, pressing down on the hidden sanctuary, and from the swirling darkness descended whispers that were not sound, but direct injections of terror into the mind. Inside the tower, the world dissolved into a gallery of personal nightmares. Valendil was back in the moment of his ancestors' betrayal, forced to watch as the Dunedain lord he had once admired shattered the First Order with a casual, contemptuous flick of his wrist. The shame was a physical acid, eating away at the foundations of his resolve. Kara stood frozen, her warrior's heart breaking as she witnessed her homeland in the east not conquered, but willingly consumed, its people cheering as they marched into the shadow, her own family among them, calling her the true traitor. Lothlórien was lost in the suffocating silence of her self-imposed exile, the ancient trees she loved turning to gnarled, grasping hands that rejected her, whispering that her solitude was a punishment, not a choice. Their mental shields, so carefully constructed, fractured under the weight of these tailor-made horrors. The Sightless veil was designed to hide a presence, but it was not built to withstand a direct, sustained siege upon the soul itself. Cries of anguish and denial echoed in the stone chambers as each watcher fought a battle They could not win with stealth or steel. Only Elara stood firm, a single point of stillness in the chaos. The Silmaril shard blazed in her hand, its light forming a fragile dome of calm around her, pushing back the encroaching shadows. She could feel the others breaking, their spirits fraying like rotten rope. She saw Valendil sinking to his knees, his face a mask of ancestral guilt. Kara blindly reaching for a weapon to turn on herself. Lothlórien curling into a ball of utter desolation. To simply defend was to lose. The ritual was not just an attack, it was a conversion, seeking to twist their sanctuary into a permanent well of sorrow, a beachhead from which Sauron's shadow could spread and snuff out hope across the lands. The tower itself groaned, its stones beginning to weep a black, tarry substance. In that moment of absolute crisis, Elara understood the true purpose of the light she carried. It was not a tool for hiding, or even for revealing. It was a weapon of creation. With a final, desperate glance at her friends, she made her choice. She drove the Silmaril shard point first into the central stone of the tower's foundation. Closing her eyes, she did not push her will against the darkness, but poured her entire being into the crystal, offering her own spirit as a conduit. She channeled not just power, but memory, the memory of Valendil's sacrifice on the riverbank, of Kara's hard-won integrity, of Lothlórien's fierce love for a dying world, of Ciri's enduring hope. She funneled every fragment of their collective strength into the stone. The effect was instantaneous and agonizing. A silent shockwave of pure, white light erupted from the base of the tower, racing up its walls, scouring the black tears from the stone. The light was not harsh, but profoundly cleansing, a resonant chord of defiance that struck directly at the heart of the despair. The psychic screams of the Nazgûl, heard only in the spirit, echoed in furious pain as the ritual's hold was broken. The tower was no longer a hidden sentinel. It had become a star, a brilliant beacon of hope, blazing defiantly in the shadowed land, a signal that could be seen for leagues in every direction by any soul with a heart to look for it. The wave of cleansing light washed over the land like a tide, scouring the shadows from the stone and the sorrow from the heart. For leagues around, those who had felt the creeping dread of Sauron's ritual suddenly found their spirits lifting, as if a suffocating blanket had been torn away. In the Golden Wood, the Galadrim, their hope rekindled by this impossible beacon, fought with renewed fury, their arrows finding their marks as the orc armies, confused and leaderless, began to falter and break on both the northern and southern fronts. The tide of the battle had turned, but the cost was etched on Elara's face. She slumped against the central stone, the Silmaril shard in her hand, now a dull, gray pebble, its brilliant light entirely spent. Her own energy, the very essence of her spirit, had been the fuel for that glorious explosion, and she was left hollowed out, a vessel drained to its dregs. The tower was saved, but it was now a brightly lit citadel in a land of shadows, and its guardians were wounded and exposed. Valendil, his own nightmare shame washed away by her light, was the first to reach her side. His ranger's eyes scanned the horizon, seeing the retreating forms of the enemy. "We could harry them," he urged, his voice rough with the aftermath of battle. "We could turn their retreat into a rout," but Elara shook her head, her movement slow and heavy. Her gaze fell upon Kara, who was still trembling from her vision, and Lothlórien, who clung to the wall as if the world were still spinning. "No," she whispered, her voice a thread of sound. We protect the light. We guard our wounded. Our victory is not in chasing them, but in holding this ground. The order was a defensive one, a choice to heal and fortify rather than pursue a fleeting vengeance. It was the decision of a leader who understood that their greatest weapon was not the shard itself, but the unity of those who guarded it. This hard-won victory had proven their power, but it had also painted a target on their backs, brighter than any signal fire. Sauron had felt their defiance, a sting from an enemy he thought beneath his notice. The Silent Watchers were no longer a rumor or a ghost. They were a primary enemy, and the full, terrible weight of Barad-dûr would now be focused on their eradication. In the days that followed, as the free peoples across the land tended to their wounded and shared tales of the sudden, mysterious return of hope, the Watchers looked out from their radiant tower. They had become a symbol, but symbols are fragile things. They knew their order could no longer remain a small, secret cell. To survive the coming storm, they would have to grow, to weave their silent vigilance into the very fabric of a world, preparing for its final, desperate stand. The light of the Silmaril shard may have faded, but its echo now lived on in the vows spoken under the Melian, in a quiet ceremony witnessed by the Lady Galadriel and a select few from the Free Peoples. Elara's voice was steady as she formally re-established the order of the Silent Watchers. She swore an oath not to conquer, but to observe, not to seek glory, but to be the unseen shield. Their watchtower, cleansed and radiant, was consecrated as their central haven, a heart from which a new nervous system would spread. Immediately, they began the painstaking work of constructing a network of smaller, hidden posts, secret places woven into the fabric of the land, from the highest peaks of the Misty Mountains to the forgotten coasts of Gondor. This expansion was not met with universal approval. Some commanders, their spirits lifted by the recent victory, argued passionately for a new, aggressive role. Why hide our greatest weapon? They demanded. Let the Watchers become a blade in the dark, striking directly at the enemy's heart. Elara faced this pressure with a calm that belied her youth. A blade, no matter how sharp, can be broken, she countered. A shield, if it remains unseen, can endure forever. We will not repeat the mistakes of those who sought to control the shadow with its own tools. To solidify this fragile new foundation, she made her first formal appointments. Valendil, his ranger's patience and hard-won humility, making him the ideal teacher, was named her second in command, tasked with molding raw recruits into masters of the Sightless Veil. Kara, with her soldier's eye for terrain and tactics, and Lothlórien, with her preternatural connection to the wild, were jointly made masters of field operations. This new structure gave the order a strength it had never before possessed, a leadership forged in trust rather than inherited from a fallen age. The rebirth of the Watchers marked a profound shift in the Long War, giving the Free Peoples an advantage Sauron could not easily counter, an enemy he could not find to crush. Yet this victory came with a somber truth. The weight of this unseen war would now rest entirely on their shoulders, a burden of countless secrets and sacrifices that would never be sung in any hall. As the last words of the ceremony faded into the forest air, a breathless messenger emerged from the trees, his face pale. He brought word from the north of strange, cold lights flickering in the ruins of Angmar, and a silence deeper than any grave settling over the land. A new shadow was stirring, and the silent watchers were already turning their gaze toward it. The new reports from the north could not be ignored. Elara dispatched her first official scouting team, a handpicked trio of watchers whose mastery of the Sightless Veil was now their only armor. Their mission was to penetrate the forsaken valley of Angmar and observe the chilling truth of the rumors. They moved as instructed, their spirits woven into the howling wind and the biting cold, becoming less than ghosts in that blighted land. What they witnessed was a grim confirmation. Orcs from Mount Gundabad were regrouping in the ancient ruins, reforging weapons and swearing new oaths to the Dark Lord under the command of a hulking troll chief. The intelligence they gathered, precise counts of warriors and detailed maps of the invasion routes, was swiftly passed through silent channels. It reached the dwarves of the Blue Mountains and the scattered settlements of the Dunedain just in time. Forewarned, the dwarves sealed their gates and reinforced their outer defenses, while the rangers of the north laid ambushes in the high passes. The surprise invasion was met with a wall of prepared steel and grim resolve, and countless lives were saved because an unseen eye had been watching. Yet the land of Angmar held older, more chilling secrets. While observing a mustering of trolls near the ruins of Carn Dûm, the Watchers found themselves stalked by a remnant of the Witch King's ancient power. It was not a force of flesh and blood, but a ghostly army, spectral warriors bound to the cold stone by centuries of hatred. These wraiths could not see the Watchers, for the veil hid the light of their living spirits. Instead, the phantoms sensed the emptiness they projected, the void where life should be. They were drawn to the unnatural silence of the veil itself, swirling around the hidden scouts like a cold mist, their silent, gaping mouths and hollow eyes probing the nothingness where the Watchers stood frozen. It was an eerie, unforeseen challenge, a threat that their primary defense seemed to somehow attract. The team held their positions, their minds locked in a terrifying stillness, until the spectral host eventually lost interest and drifted back into the stone. They had passed the test, but they brought back a sobering truth. Some shadows could not be dispelled, only endured. Upon their return, Elara listened to the full report, her expression growing graver with each detail. The victory in the south had been decisive, but the war was endless. She made a decision that would bind their order for ages to come. "We will establish a permanent watch on Angmar," she declared, her voice resonating with a finality that echoed through the hall. "Our vigilance must be eternal. Some evils do not die, they only sleep, and it is our charge to ensure they never wake." This commitment expanded their responsibilities exponentially. It was no longer a single mission, but a generational pact. Watchers would now take shifts in the frozen north, their lives dedicated to a silent, lonely vigil against a threat that might never fully materialize, yet could never be ignored. This act solidified their role as Middle-earth's true unseen guardians, a shield that would stand watch long after the names of its founders were forgotten. As the first stones of the new northern watchpost were laid, hidden within the cold mist of the mountains, Elara felt the immense weight of the legacy she was building. For every shadow they dispelled, another always waited in the wings, patient and hungry in the dark. The air in the healing chamber was still and thin, holding its breath. Cirion lay upon his simple cot, the vibrant light that had once animated his ancient form now faded to the barest ember. He called for Elara, and his voice was the rustle of a last, dry leaf clinging to a branch. She came to his side, her own heart a heavy weight in her chest. He did not speak with words, but reached out a trembling hand, his cool fingers resting on her brow. A final, brilliant connection flared between their minds, a silent river of memories, strategies, and warnings flowing from him into her. She saw the faces of the first watchers, felt the sting of their betrayal, and understood the profound, weary hope that had sustained him through millennia of solitude. With this last gift, he named her the High Watcher, transferring not just a title, but the full, crushing weight of his legacy. Then, the connection faded, the light in his eyes flickered and went out, and the last living link to the original order was gone. The silence that followed was immense. Elara stood alone in the chamber, the ghost of his knowledge a vast, echoing hall inside her mind. Doubt washed over her in a cold wave. How could she, who had been a student such a short time ago, possibly guide this fragile new order through the rising darkness? The responsibility felt like a mountain on her shoulders, one she was not strong enough to bear. But then she felt a presence at her side. Valendil did not speak, but his steady gaze was an anchor in her turmoil. Outside, she could sense Kara and Cirion standing their quiet vigil, their loyalty a silent promise. They did not follow a legend from a lost age, they followed her. In their faith, she found a strength that was her own. Her first decision as High Watcher was one of preservation. Ciriion's teachings, now woven into her own spirit, were too precious to be lost with a single life. She gathered her most trusted scribes and led them to a deep, hidden cavern behind a waterfall whose roar would mask all sound. There, they began the solemn work of inscribing his knowledge. They did not write on fragile parchment, but carved the principles of the Sightless Veil, the histories of their successes and failures, and the identities of their hidden allies into sheets of resilient river stone. This would be their living archive, a testament that would endure long after they were all dust, ensuring the Watch could always begin again. They laid Cirion to rest in a secret grove of white flowers that bloomed only under the starlight, a place he had loved for its quiet peace. As the last handful of earth was placed upon his resting place, a chapter of history closed irrevocably. The age of the ancient guides was over. The new Watchers, born from desperation and forged in fire, now stood completely on their own. The world beyond their sanctuary was not getting safer, but darker, and their unseen war would only grow more desperate. Standing at the head of her order, Elara looked not at the grave, but at the path ahead, ready to lead them into the long, watchful years, a sentinel stepping out of the shadow of her teacher to cast her own light upon the coming night. The sky above the Watchtower did not darken, it tore. A fissure of pure malice ripped through the clouds, and from it descended not an army, but a single, concentrated wave of Sauron's will. It was a force meant not to conquer, but to unmake, a psychic tsunami of despair and absolute negation, aimed at erasing their sanctuary from the world. The very stones of the tower screamed under the pressure, and the carefully maintained sightless veils of every watcher inside flickered like candles in a hurricane. They were not just being attacked, they were being personally, utterly rejected by the darkness itself. On the peak, buffeted by the gale of hatred, Elara did not command her followers to stand firm. She simply reached out, her hands finding Valendil's on one side and Kara's on the other. Cirion completed the circle, and then the others, every watcher in the tower, linked not just by touch, but by spirit. They did not brace themselves as individual shields. Instead, they wove their failing veils together, intertwining strands of shadow and light, of ranger's patience and a soldier's resolve, of a scout's silence and a healer's grace. They created a single, colossal lens of shared will. They did not meet the crushing wave with defiance, but with reflection. They accepted the full, horrifying weight of Sauron's hatred, and then, with a unity that felt like a single, harmonious chord struck against the silence, they turned it. They bent the wave of malice back upon itself, guiding its own corrosive energy into a focused echo that shot back toward the eye. The effort was excruciating. Elara felt as if her very soul were being stretched on a loom, every thread of her being fraying under the strain. Valendil's knees buckled, and Kara cried out, a raw sound of mental agony. They were moments from being scattered into nothingness, and then, at the point of absolute fracture, the Silmaril shard at Elara's breast flared. It did not blaze with the aggressive light that had cleansed the tower before. This was a softer, deeper luminescence, a glow that spoke not of power, but of persistence. It was the light of a single star, enduring the long night, the warmth of a remembered spring in the heart of winter. This gentle, unyielding radiance washed over the woven shield, reinforcing it not with force, but with meaning. It was the final, crucial element that allowed their reflection to hold. The rebounded darkness did not strike a physical fortress, but a spiritual one. For one impossible second, the constant, oppressive gaze of the eye wavered. Its concentration, broken by the shock of its own malice, returned. The vast, searching will that pressed upon all of Middle-earth flinched, creating a temporary, precious rift in its attention. In that fleeting moment, across the continent, a besieged garrison found a second wind. A hidden refugee band found a path to safety, and a leader on the verge of despair found a fragment of renewed hope. The wave receded. The torn sky stitched itself back together into its usual oppressive gloom, and the watchers collapsed upon the tower peak, breathing in ragged, painful gasps. They were alive, and their sanctuary stood, but the victory was not in having wounded the Dark Lord, for such a thing was beyond their power. The victory was in the time they had bought. Their selfless, unified vigil had given the free peoples a breath, a momentary opening in a war that had felt suffocatingly closed. Elara, lying on the cold stone, understood the true lesson of her journey. It was not about becoming a hero who could challenge Sauron in open combat. It was about becoming a guardian so steadfast, so interwoven with the cause of light, that her very presence and that of her order could become a shield. The greatest strength was not in the glorious charge, but in the silent, unwavering watch that made the charge possible. The great storm of malice had passed, but the silence that followed was not empty. It was a silence filled with purpose. In the aftermath of their impossible stand, the silent watchers did not rest. They rebuilt, they expanded, and they wove their vigilance into the very bones of Middle-earth. From the frozen mists of Angmar to the white-capped waves off the coast of Gondor, small, hidden posts were established. Each one, a silent sentinel, reporting on the Shadow's movements. Elara, her spirit forever marked by the weight of command, now stood as a confident High Watcher, her voice calm and sure as she guided new recruits. She taught them that their greatest weapon was not the power they wielded, but the trust they placed in one another. Valendil became the Order's stern but patient master of training, his own hard-learned lessons shaping raw scouts into masters of the Sightless Veil. Kara's keen mind for strategy mapped the enemy's every troop movement, while Lirien's connection to the wild whispered of corruptions in the water and soil long before they could be seen. Their names became legends, though those legends were known only in hushed tones among rangers in the wild or dwarves in deep halls, stories of unseen guardians who moved like mist. Their watchtower, though its brilliant light was now carefully concealed, remained a beacon. Its presence was a secret held in the hearts of all who fought for freedom, a quiet assurance that they were not alone in the long struggle. Sauron's shadow still lay heavy across the land, a threat that would one day demand a final, open war. But the Watchers had forged a new kind of strength, a legacy built not on glorious battles, but on the countless, unseen acts of courage that happened in the quiet spaces between history's great moments. They proved that the fate of the world can be altered not only by the ring of a sword, but by the patient, unwavering will of those who stand watch in the dark. And so their order endured, a silent promise whispered on the wind, for as long as shadows dared to loom.